Ideas are free. Unfortunately, innovation isn't. Think about it. Converting those great ideas into something that delivers value, commercial or social, isn't going to happen magically. We've got to invest. Invest all sorts of resources. Time, energy, passion, getting particular skills and knowledge to contribute, bringing different people in. We need physical resources, spaces, equipment. There's a pretty big list of things we need to do if we're going to realize our goal, which is creating value from our ideas. So, innovation is all about resources, and a useful measure for that resources is, of course, money. So, what we really need to think about if we want to make sure our venture is going to succeed is the way money flows, cash flow. Now, let's think of that concept in a little sort of analogy. Imagine that there is a canal moving from A to B, and we're trying to float our ship along that canal from A to B. Now, the canal is full of water, but unfortunately, it's got a leak. The water seeps away. So if we do nothing, pretty soon the water level drops and our ship runs aground. It doesn't get from A to B. What we need to make sure of is that there's water in the canal, pumping new water in to keep the boat afloat so it can travel from A to B and unload its precious cargo. Now, it's a simple metaphor, but what we're really seeing there is the idea of flow. Because in order to make that work, we need to make sure that enough water comes in to balance the water going out. Keep the level. Ideally, it would be nice to pump even more water in so we could store some of it in a tank and use that to help us fill up the canal when perhaps in the future there might be a drought or something. But stay with the basics. We need to make sure enough flows in to cover what's going out. That's cash flow. And it's also the reason why many entrepreneurial organizations fail, because they can't manage the cash flow. Not because of the quality of the idea, not because of the great value proposition, simply the mechanics of keeping it all afloat. So we need to pay attention to cash flow. And basically that requires us to look in detail at two things. The resources coming in, the revenue streams, the sources of water, new water for our canal, and the costs, the resources that we have to give out in order to make our venture happen. And we have to keep those at least in balance. Ideally, we want that to be positive so that in the long term, we've got more revenue coming in than the costs, so we can grow and sustain our venture and scale it over the long term. So how do we do this? Well, thinking about cash flow isn't complex. First of all, we need to think about our costs. And more importantly, what are they? A long list of them. What's the cost structure? And how they play out over time. Now, some examples of cost are time, the time of other people, perhaps specialized equipment, perhaps we need to rent or purchase the space in which to do things, we need to sign contracts with people perhaps to deliver our services or offer us channels like the internet for our platform. Whatever it is, there are costs. So the first thing to do is make a list of all of them. What's the cost structure? It's also useful to try and separate those out into things which have to be done, the initial investment and so on, and things which vary over time. The first lot are really called fixed costs. We have to spend them. They're there. The variable costs are the ones which change. For example, if we're selling a product and we sell one of them, it costs us a certain amount to get that from A to B, from us to our customer. If we have 10,000 products, it will cost us more. It varies with the amount of products we sell. So there are some things which are variable over time and some things which are fixed. But basically what we need absolutely is to have some sense of what are all the costs. And it's helpful to understand which ones make up the big bulk of what we're doing, because they're the ones we want to keep a close eye on. But getting an idea for our cost structure. Think of it, if you like, as a kind of pizza and all the different slices that make up the pizza itself. But whatever we use as a way of thinking about it, we need that cost structure. But it's also helpful for us to understand how those costs play out over time. Now, the good news is that these two gentlemen introduced something way back in 1978, which still today gives us a really powerful tool to help with this question of cash flow management. Their names are Dan Brinklin and Bob Frankston, and the two of them worked together to create something called VisiCalc. VisiCalc was essentially the world's first spreadsheet, the first killer application for computers. Now, the spreadsheet was perhaps one of the very first killer apps, the kind of program that every computer device needed. The early versions, Lotus 123 or VisiCalc, have given way to things like Microsoft Excel and Google Sheets. But the principle is always the same. Very, very simple to translate numerical data into forms where we can work with it. So in this case, what we could do with a very simple spreadsheet is list our costs and list time and identify what changes over time. It gives us some sense of the way in which our cash, our costs, are going out, that water level leaving the canal. So we can get a handle on our costs using a simple spreadsheet and get some sense of how that happens over time. It's the same with revenue. Think again of the revenue structure. What are all the different ways in which we can fund what it is we're trying to do? Maybe we invest our own money. Maybe we borrow from family or friends. Perhaps we run a Kickstarter campaign, crowdsourcing some funds. Perhaps there's a government scheme to give us a loan or even a grant. All sorts of different ways to get us started, followed by, when we start to sell our product or service, an income from that. And that income stream, of course, if we're successful, will grow. But what might be smart is to diversify. What other sources of income, what other revenue streams might we be able to bring in the picture? But it's exactly the same as we did with our costs. What's the revenue structure and how does that change over time? Once again, we can type that into our spreadsheet and get a sense of how that moves over time. And then, of course, we can put those two together, the costs and the revenue, and try and make sure that at least they balance, and ideally that the revenue is greater than the costs. Most importantly, what we don't want is any period when our costs are exceeding our revenue, because then the business could be in trouble. Now, this isn't just a question for commercial businesses, it's just as important for social innovation. Now, social innovation is all about wanting to change the world, making a difference, but that doesn't come cost-free. What we want to do is to make sure we have a robust model for managing that cash flow. Maybe our revenue is coming in the form of donations or grants or people dipping in their pockets and giving cash, whatever. Our revenue and our costs still need to be in balance. And especially if we want this thing to survive in the long term, we need to be very clear how to manage those revenue streams. One of the characteristics of the social innovation world is there's an initial start, the pilot is successful, and then the money runs out. So where's the resource coming from to keep that great innovation going, to sustain and even grow it? But overall, key lessons are all around this idea of cash flow, balancing costs and revenue and keeping that boat afloat.